Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Has the shoveling stopped?
They're working their way down the stairs, so it should at least be getting quieter.
Well, that's not that reassuring since it started very loud.
Well, I mean, we're trending in the right direction, which is the most important thing. Okay. So, how we want to do this? One of you guys want to handle the? I'll have the Twitch chat up, and you guys want to handle like one of you check out the Steam chat in case somebody talks there.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
right. And the last thing to do is tweet something out.
All right. Tweeted.
Sweet. Retweet you. Well, I'm exhausted. I did all the work of setting this up. Now you guys have to talk.
Didn't sign up for this.
Made a lot of bold claims.
Puzzle games is the only good genre.
Puzzle games is the only good genre. That's good. Come out swinging. Go let's start out by complaining about other indie devs. People in shooter genres don't know what's good.
I mean, tell me the lie.
Oh, man. Yeah, I don't know. I will say I've been checking out. I feel like last time we were in the Steam Festival, there were so many Sokoban games. And I don't know if that was just it felt that way because we had like Corey and everybody else was there. And this time around, I went in and there's literally a Sokoban checkbox and there's only 3, which is a major bummer.
Wait, is there actually a Suckerburn category in the demo?
Yeah. I mean, I'm on the what do you call it? You can do this thing where you are in the experimental labs or whatever. So I don't know if I only see that because of that. But if you go under the
Oh
puzzle,
yeah, no, I also see that. Your tag Suckerburn.
yeah, you can go click Sokoban. Hey, Infinite Nutshell. All right, let me tell my Discord that we started this. I forgot to do that part. Announcements. Twitch.tv/dire goldfish. All right. What day of the week is it?
It's Friday.
Hey, Jamie. Yeah. Yeah, I'm drowning right now. I just have so much to do. I've just completely lost track of everything. And I feel like whenever I'm not working, I'm online checking the forums for the lab rat on Steam, or I'm checking like the Discord for one of the 3 Discords I'm in, or I'm like, even when I'm not working, I'm somehow feel like I'm working because I'm checking all this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, you've been in like playtest, getting playtest data mode for like a month now.
Yeah, I mean, we started the beta. So the beta was an excuse for many reasons. I knew I wanted to be in the Steam Festival and I wanted people to pound on the demo ahead of time.
Yep.
But I was also just getting feedback, and it's also just I have no QA, so I would just pull 100 people into the beta every like week or so, and that would let me test, especially if I made a major change. That would just let me test how things were, if I broke anything. It was fun to try out the new beta stuff on Steam in general, because like this is kind of a new thing on Steam. You can add like a beta button, and people can sign up for it, and I just wanted to see what it was like. I think it's cool. I think it's a little bit limiting because you can't decide who's in the beta on Steam. You have no idea. So some people will sign up that don't speak English, or people will sign up and they don't have like I don't have a Mac build right now. So if you can sign up for the beta no matter what.
And are you just saying, okay, I've got 1,000 people signed up. I'm gonna let 100 of them in, and it just chooses 100 random people. Is that how it works?
Yeah, it chooses a random 100 people. Um, That's the way that one works. That's why I think the better way to do it is to set up a beta on Steam, but don't actually have the button on your website, and instead just use like have a separate thing, like a mailing list, that or a Google form to have people sign up for your beta on a Google form, and that way you can kind of choose who you send it to. It also lets you capture people's emails, so you can email them again later in the future. Whereas if
you also did that, right?
Yeah. That was there's fewer people that signed up for that comparatively, but it's I don't know, it's better because the people that signed up for that are like actual fans and stuff. They tend to be nicer.
Yeah, they know what kind of game they're signing up for if they're familiar with kind.
Yeah, I mean, there's a certain cohort of people that are just signing up for every free thing, like every free demo, every free beta, and that sort of thing. But yeah, overall, it's been fun. It's just like the other thing is there hasn't been many changes to the demo because we have to make the rest of the game at some point, and that's where like a lot of the work of January, February, and March are going into getting into the rest of the game. And it's going really well. Lucas has been just absolutely crushing it. He's got a first pass of all the puzzles in. He's in a place where he's like refining the puzzles now. I'm moving into working on the narrative, which will take a little while.
So what are those collaborative relationships? What's the back and forth? How does that work out?
Excuse me. It's different for each person. Like the Kira, this is just a video of me playing before on loop. It's different for each person. For Lucas, it was I started this as like a quick little game jam with him from the very beginning. And so he's been here from the very beginning. It's hard to explain. He made a puzzle script game very early on. And then I took that and I ported that into my engine. And then one of us would come up with the idea for a mechanic and add it, and the other person would give feedback. Basically, I would do like a template puzzle, like what if this was a thing? And then he would go try to make puzzles off of it. And we would see if that was fun or not. And then that cycle would just keep happening on a loop, sort of. And so we did that for a couple months. And that was really fun. I'm trying to think. There's a couple ways where it took us a while to figure out what we were making early on. So there was a couple of things like at first I was like, okay, we want to have a tank. And you can see this right now. Like this is what the tank eventually became. Is this thing that you ride. But the initial prototype for it was an object that you could run up to and you could climb onto it as a choice. And then you could move it around. And so there could be multiple tanks in a level and that sort of thing. And Lucas made like 10 really interesting, extremely difficult puzzles using these tanks. But it didn't, they were good and they were puzzles, but we reached a point really quickly where we just had a ton of puzzles and there was no cohesion to the game at all. And so a lot of this was, while he was doing that, I was doing a lot of the writing and figuring out what the kind of game was. Because we had ideas of a theme, but we didn't really start out with a really strong theme. Like in a Monsters Expedition, you kick over a tree. What are all the things that come out of kicking over a tree? Whereas this was like, we came up with a lot of mechanics and ideas, and then we had to kind of pull that back into the theme and into the story. And so some of whatever you start with ends up changing and getting cut the most, right? Like if he started with puzzles and then we found the theme that kind of worked for as many puzzles as possible, but then that meant we had to cut the puzzles that didn't fit that, even if they were technically good.
Yeah, that sounds like a painful process. Like I've only ever cut puzzles because they're bad. And like to be like, well, this is good, but it's just not gelling with the rest of the game is like, I admire the strength.
No, I mean, Lucas is amazing for that in that way. And if there's anything that's ever really, truly good, we're going to have like a kind of director's cut at the very end, just a page of puzzles that are good but didn't fit. And so,
that's fine.
Yeah, so all of those will still exist. They'll live on. You can probably still play them. So, I mean, there are a couple of ideas. A more often thing is I will think something is brilliant and I will do all the code and I'll make a template puzzle and I'll give that to Lucas and he'll be like, this is not This is just, I can't do anything with this. That's a
He's
little bit.
like, hey, you should have just let me prototype this in PuzzleScript first.
Yeah, but there's certain things that are just extremely difficult to prototype in PuzzleScript.
Sure.
And there's certain things that are, especially when you take a look at what's happening later on. Because like once we realized what this was a satire and we're making fun of video games and different video game genres. Once we found that, then it's like, okay, now we have to make a 2D side scroller. And you're not gonna.
Yeah, you have to.
Yeah, so like I could show you what that's starting to look like. That's looking pretty good. But I wonder if I could. Here, hold on. We'll do this as a sneak peek, just because you guys are.
Let's make this stream even more technically complicated.
Well, I mean, all I have to do is stream a desktop, and it'll be fun. I want to show this off really badly, but yeah. So like, there's certain ideas that are just very visual, or that are just very unique and different, and you can't. There was just no way to do that stuff in PuzzleScript. I don't think.
Oh yeah, for sure. Do you have like a metric for how many puzzles a particular mechanic needs to work for in order to make it fit? Because like it feels like your game, more than a lot of games, you can get away with just like, oh, we've got this cool idea, it's funny, but it's only funny for like one level, and you can kind of get away with doing it anyway.
Yeah, and I mean that's
in a different game it would like feel more out of place.
Yeah, I mean that was part of the goal. I think the goal was I wanted to. So I would watch people play these games, and generally people play for like 20 or 30 minutes, and they hit a puzzle that's hard, or they get tired and they walk away. And so the idea was like we need to have a treat for the player, something that makes them curious, something that they can look forward to roughly every like 15, 20 minutes. And so it's less about the number of puzzles and more about how long we think it'll take a person to get from one place to another place. And how often we can kind of give somebody that, if you surprise somebody with something delightful, they play that and they're like, oh, what's next, you know? And we need to just kind of have that at regular intervals. And so any opportunity to do something like that is good. I don't know how else to put it. Like, and we do, I personally tend to think about that less as number of puzzles and more about amount of time.
And that makes sense because, like, of course, is like not all puzzles will take the same amount of time, and that's something I've kind of resented about the like focus on puzzle count in games. Like that's often one of the first questions players will ask is like how many, and it's just like, well, if you breeze through a dozen, or you have one that's like really interesting and you can sink your teeth into it, and they take the same amount of time, like you say, thinking about it in terms of time makes more sense, I think.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that's also. Oh, I'm hearing some echo from one of you.
I think it's my cat.
Oh, it's.
That is like, the weirdest meow I've ever heard.
Yeah, that was a hell of a thing. Okay. I think a lot of times people will ask how long is the game, and the correct answer is to give them that in time. But the other side of this is like, I've heard from different people that the demo is either half an hour or 2 hours.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so like that's
we had the same thing with Bonfire Peaks demo. Like I don't know how long people are saying that is, but like I was definitely saying at one point, well, a good demo length is half an hour.
Mm-hmm.
And Bonfire Peaks demo is definitely longer than that for most people.
I mean, it's really like if you're enjoying that time, like, or whatever. I try to just be like, I guess if you're not making any promises, or you're like, it's at least this long for people who care about getting a certain amount of time out of a game, and then just like, as long as you're enjoying your time, like I prefer the idea of people not rushing to speedrun these games or whatever. I'm like I there's no timer, like let it breathe.
Yeah.
Like Steam's tracking you, but otherwise. Yeah, so the tone of Labrat is something that are you having what's that like in terms of wrestling with you know, like Alan said, you could do something a little bit more silly or playful than you might be able to get away with otherwise in another puzzle game. And has that writing that line and not crossing it or whatever, has that been something that's a challenge at all? Or
Well, I mean, I think, dude, I'm definitely hearing echo through your mic, Corey, I think. There, it goes away after a while. I'm not sure what that is. But the finding the voice of Sarah, of the AI, is still a challenge. It's something that I'm still working on right now. Specifically trying, how do I put it? When I started this, we thought we were going to make a much smaller, faster game. At least I did. I didn't intend for this to become a larger, real project. I was kind of looking for something chill to do during COVID. And so I thought the easiest narrative you could do, like the easiest wrapper, is to just say, well, it's all a game, or this is all a test, or something along those lines, very similar to Portal. That's a sort of framing that's just really easy to work with, right? Nice cat. And so, how do I put it? I think really quickly, one of the problems I had was differentiating from Portal. And especially because I'm doing the voice and I'm a chick. And so what you have is if there's going to be a machine learning algorithm, any kind of technical thing with a female voice, especially in a game like this, I wasn't hiding it. It looks it steals the color palette from Portal. And having something that doesn't feel like GLaDOS was kind of important. I wanted something that was distinctive, something that kind of spoke to more modern problems, something that spoke to what social media, that felt more like what a millennial thinks of, rather than GLaDOS, which is really funny and hilarious, but is very much like an AI that's kind of mean-spirited and kind of... I would argue that GLaDOS is evil, whereas what I was trying to do with Sarah was make something that's not intentionally evil, in the same way tech is not intentionally evil. It's actually trying really, really hard to entertain you and trying really, really hard to be good and successful. It's just some of the outcomes and some of the assumptions that spawn off of that are probably bad for humanity. And I was kind of trying to lean into that. But that's a really nuanced thing to sell in a puzzle game, And
it's almost it's funnier to me that this AI is well intentioned and then is like, not understanding humanity and is like is not definitely not trying to antagonize you, even if it ends up being that way anyways. And
yeah. Well, they say that the most dangerous AI is not one that's incredibly smart. It's one that's how do I put it? There's this story, I think my husband told me about this once. There's this story about this AI that's designed to make paper clips. And what happens is it was just designed to make the best possible paperclip for humanity. And it starts out really simple, it's it optimizes the warehouse where paperclips are made. And then it looks into it. It's like, well, we would make paperclips faster if we could optimize the transportation system between where the metal is manufactured and where the warehouse is. And then eventually it just kind of takes over the world in an attempt to optimize as much as possible the production of these paperclips. Enslaves humanity to make as many paperclips as possible, as good as possible, as fast as possible. And yeah, there's just sort of a thing there that I always thought was pretty funny. But I will say the writing is hard, humor is hard. There's a lot of different ideas that went in here, and
you're collaborating. You're collaborating on that side as well, right?
Yeah. So early on, I started working with Matt Burns. He's fantastic. He's like an angel. I had to kind of put him on. We talked about it, and I was like, I need you to I need to not think about the narrative for a couple months while I work with Lucas. So I haven't really spoken to him since like early December, I think. But yeah, he came on early. It was his idea to do VO. Early on, I thought this was going to be a much smaller project. I was going to do it all in text. He was the one that said we should look into getting a voice actor, that we should have VO and that sort of thing. And I think that was brilliant in the end. What usually happens there is we have a Google Doc, and so one of us will start writing an intro and an outro for each of the puzzles, and then the other one will come in and rewrite it, offer comments and so forth, and we go back and forth in a Google Doc. I will say that was one of the harder things. Like, in an ideal world, I can't be the bottleneck for everything. You know, like we can't make games efficiently and quickly if everything has to go through Gwen. And in the end, I'd prefer it if this was a team where we were collaborating and everybody had ownership over their own stuff. And I think we've worked that out really well with Lucas. Like Lucas has complete ownership over all the puzzles. But I think with Matt, I mean, he's on the project part-time as a contractor. He has a full-time job. I'm surprisingly opinionated about all of the writing. Like, and so, and it wasn't, and the other thing is when we first started, I didn't know what I was writing yet. Neither of us did. I just kind of, I was going to let him just completely own the entire story. I assumed this would be something where I would tell him, okay, make a story. He would write it, and then I would implement it, and that would be that, right? But the story he wrote initially was brilliant and beautiful, and was this really sad story about like a developer that was trying to make a game, and it wasn't working, and she was just really bummed out, and like the AI went away, and it was this developer just being sad and slowly losing her mind, and it was like too real, and a major bummer, and I didn't think that, like, one of the reasons I really wanted to work with Matt was because he's such a great writer, and Eliza was so moving and emotional, and I thought that would be great to have something like that. But as soon as we did that, I realized, like, no, I want to make something funny, and he had no idea, right? Like, I didn't know that when we started this. I didn't realize that was important to me. But everything I've put out, like when I do my GDC talks and stuff, having a certain amount of humor and a certain amount of charm in everything I create was important to me, and I didn't realize that at the beginning of this. And so at some point I had to go be like, oh shit, Matt, like, I think we need to change this. I don't know what we need to change it to, but this isn't going to work. And I think that was a failure on my part. I didn't articulate that early. I didn't know it. I didn't articulate it. I didn't, another way I think
that's part of the process, right? I mean, you have to throw away work, and that's not lost. It's just how you get to the thing that is where you want.
Sure, but in the past, every time I threw away work, I was throwing away my own work, and it does feel like so much more of a failure if you, like, to me, it feels so obvious in hindsight that I should have said this stuff, like I should have communicated this, and I didn't, and it's just way harder to throw away somebody else's work, in my opinion. And the other thing is, like,
it's tough. Like, we went through this a lot with A Monster's Expedition, and like, it's not just like throwing away somebody else's work. It's like, I found it. I completely failed to set a clear direction for the project, and like, you do that, and it leads to throwing away people's work once, and like, that's fine. People go over it. But when that keeps happening repeatedly, it is so demotivating and horrible. Like, for me, for the team, it's just like really, really rough to do work and then have it not quite come together and have to start over and like not ever be sure that you're out of that cycle.
Yeah. Did you have to redo things multiple times for A Monster's Expedition?
Like, the puzzles, no. I mean, the puzzles went through a lot of iteration, but like, the core was there. But like, everything else, like, yeah, it was really rough for like over a year.
I was wondering if you would want to talk about that, because I know all of it. The art style went through massive changes and then massive changes again. I remember for a while I played a build where you're running around as a little dude with an axe.
Yeah, like, we had that axe guy implemented like maybe like less than 6 months after we started the project, and we always kind of knew, this doesn't quite work, this is a placeholder. But it lasted like through getting funding, it lasted through a bunch of art iterations on the environment art, just because, well, we don't know exactly what we're to replace this with. So I guess this placeholder character is staying until we do know what we're replacing them with. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it was very close to the end before we just decided, well, no, let's just use the monster from A Good Snowman and implement that.
And was that like a stylistic decision because you didn't want to be like a deforester, or was that like an animation decision because it was easier to see the movement? Or
It was a few different things. Like even when we decided we wanted to use the monster, we still had the question of, well, do we want the monster with an axe, or do we want the monster to just push stuff over? And like when we're working out the characters, like that was that dichotomy too. It's like, well, both of these models could work. Like, what do we want somebody who's just strong enough and big enough that pushes trees over, or do we want someone that's cutting things with a tool? And like that actually conveys a lot about the character, and we had no idea which was better. And it has like animation impacts, and yeah, it's like not even having a good sense of on that level of like which road we want to go down was like made it really hard to actually work out what the best plan was.
yeah, well, I mean, I would argue that the your games always have a very strong sense of theme in the way that matters, which is that the core loop that you're doing ties into the theme. Like I feel like I'm chopping down, like whether you went with an axe or if you went with a monster that pushed trees over, either way, the puzzles were about arranging these trunks of wood, right? Like, and the puzzles were part of the theme, no matter what. And I will say that is that is so important. That is the thing that I think separates your games and makes them really good. Same thing with like a good snowman is hard to build. That is something that is not present in Lab Rat, right? Like there's no the reason why is this thing electrocuted on to be one of 3 different colors on each side of this block? You know, like there's no like the core thing that you do isn't tied into the theme, and that's something that like for the next game I want to have that not be true. That's something that I think is really difficult to work around. If I'm going to gripe about like my problems. Somebody's asking if you have old screenshots of Axe Guy.
I'm looking now.
Yeah, it is a tough thing to. They're like, okay, well, our main character is knocking trees over. How do we make them not a terrible, unlikable? Like, like it's unless you do that twist at the end where well, I don't want to reference any particular game for spoilers, but where you're not actually the hero and do that twist, which is like, yeah, I'm glad you didn't go there, and I'm glad you also didn't go. Because like early versions had way more of a story, and yeah, I also like the exhibit format, and ended up just lending itself so well to, okay, well, it's like a platter that we can put as much or as little onto. We don't have to worry about an arc there and all these things that kind of would have burdened the game otherwise.
I think it's better to have like no story versus a bad story, or to you have to. It's a lot of work to have a really strong narrative arc.
I've said this before. Like adding a story to any game makes it 10 times harder to make. And like I didn't really appreciate that until a Monsters Expedition, and I was like, oh yeah, like people love stories. This game is going to be so much better if I had a story.
I mean. There was no way a Monsters Expedition from the beginning. I mean, it's not just that you're trying to do a story at that point. The idea of doing a story where you can experience any part of it in a different order, or figuring out how to make that work. I know
the overall structure is linear, like and could be made more or less linear according to the needs of the story. Like there was definitely a time in development when I was thinking, okay, well, you're this character, you're moving through this world, like that is prime candidate for like a conventional like story with like plot beats and the like.
Yeah, of course.
But turns out that's hard, and I don't know how to do that. So, and I don't know how to do that, and I don't know how to direct other people doing that, and I tried directing other people doing that and was a very bad manager. So
I think it's managing people is a whole other thing. Keeping everybody excited and passionate about what they're doing and that sort of thing. There's a whole that is such an important skill, and it makes everybody just keeping everybody satisfied with their work, satisfied that wanting to work with you again. I don't know. That's a whole other conversation. Managing a narrative is, I think you could do that. I will say that the hard thing is, I don't know. For me, I can write major story beats. I can tie those into puzzles. I think you could too. I think the managing writing specifically is the one thing that I find difficult, mostly because I think there's like, so if I'm giving feedback to Lucas, I'll play the puzzles. I'll tell him what I think. I might sometimes I'll have really strong opinions. I'm like, I really think you should make these changes. I'll recommend changes. I'll tell him which ones I think should probably be cut or the order that I think things should be in. But I never make those changes. I never cut a puzzle. I tell him, and then he does it. And if he doesn't want to do it, he pushes back, and we have a conversation until we've figured it out or until we've tested it and an assumption has been proven one way or the other. But I never cut puzzles. Or with Snite, with any artist I work with, they'll do something and I'll have feedback. I'll think that I'll want to change the silhouette of something. I'll do a paint over. I'll explain what I want. I'll tell them why I like something and why I don't like something. But I never change their art, even though I obviously could. Like, it would be trivial. I never go in, though. I never touch the art. I'd much rather they do it so they have ownership. With writing, I can't do that. There's something about writing. There's no way for me to know what to tell Matt to do without doing it myself. Like, the only way to direct a writer, as far as I can tell, like, he'll write something, I'll be like, I want something else. I want something this. And the only way I can figure out what this is to write it. And then I've fucking written it, right? Like, and at that point, and that's the worst thing you can do. You never, ever, ever do somebody's job for them. It's okay for like a contractor or like somebody where you just need like a second set of hands to do something. That's fine. But if you're working with somebody creative and you're collaborating, you never do their work for them. You always just say what you like, what you don't like, and you direct them. And I can't do that with writing, and I don't know why. Like, I think it's a failing. I think I just don't know what I want until I do it with writing, whereas I don't necessarily feel that way with puzzles or art. I feel like I can picture in my head how a thing will be better, and I can articulate it with puzzles or with art.
But yeah. if you're doing a paint over, isn't that, it's more or less you're still saying this is what I want, and then you're leaving it to them to implement it. Like, how is it really that different if what's the process with Matt where you feel like you're crossing that line?
Well, I think because when you're doing a paint over, you haven't changed the final product. It's the sense of it's really important to me that anybody creative has a sense of ownership over what they did, right? Like, it's really important to me that Lucas can say every single puzzle in the game was something that he did. Whereas with the writing, we can't say that the story is Matt. We co-wrote it, and we're fine with that, and Matt's totally cool with that. But it is in an ideal world, like if I want to grow as a director and work on bigger and bigger projects, I need to be able to direct people without doing the job. I don't know how to articulate it. I'm not saying it's bad. Like, this is fine. It's going to result in a great story. This is all good. But, like, Lucas is so happy he quit his job and works for Chump Squad now, and he's going to go off. He just got funding for his own game, and after this, he's going to go make his own game, right? Like, usually, Snite feels a sense of ownership over the art of this. He's proud of his work in this game. This is his game as much as it is mine and Lucas's. And that's what I want. Like, that's what I think the best thing is to inspire people on that level. And I don't obviously, Matt has a full-time job. He works at Zachtronics. He's happy. I'm not expecting like him to quit and go indie and shit. But like, I don't feel like I did as good as I could there. And the problem is I don't really see a path to improve as a director towards being that yet. Still working on it.
Do you think part of it is just that part of you wants to be the writer on the game?
No.
Okay.
No, I mean, I would. I enjoy all of this. I enjoy doing the art. I enjoy making puzzles. I enjoy the writing sometimes. I mostly just want it to. I think it's just that I have a particular thing that I want, and I don't know what that is until I get it. Uh, yeah, I think that's part of it. The other part of it is like, so I've been thinking.
And
Oh, go ahead.
I mean, I think also some of this can be like just somebody if you're struggling to work with somebody that, and I'm not saying that you're struggling to work with Matt, like this is what I felt like. If I'm struggling to work with somebody, that doesn't mean that they're bad at their job. Like you can be a bad fit with somebody without that being a condemnation of either of your skills. It's just some people have compatible working styles and some people don't. And so I think like you might find that a different writer with a different like style or even just different inclinations. Like it sounds like maybe some of it is just like the kind of directions you were trying to pull and the kind of directions Matthew was trying to pull are slightly different. And if you found somebody else who just happens to push in a direction more similar to what you're already inclined, maybe that would just happen to work better. It's really hard to know until like I haven't been through this on multiple projects, but like maybe if you try making like 3 more games with narrative, you'll just find, oh, I just happened to click with this person more than that person on or this project just happened to come together so much more nicely just because sometimes you get lucky.
Yeah.
I feel like this is the first time you're doing it like this, so you won't really have analysis of why anything works the way it does until you've done it a few more times.
Perhaps, yeah. I will. Yeah. I mean, in this specific case, like in this specific case, everything is going really well. I'm just nitpicking like a thing I could have done better. So, and I think working with Matt is probably, he's so easy to work with. It's unbelievable. I think I was just, I tend to do self-reflection on places I could do better. And I think like, I don't think I inspired him as well as I could. So I'm putting this one entirely on me. But again, we're not done with the project yet. In fact, the biggest thing to come is narrative. The time management is something that I think the thing that's furthest behind now is narrative by intent. Like I wanted to get the puzzles done and everything. And audio. I think a big thing I want to do going forward is be less of a bottleneck. And so like, for instance, Lucas is gonna be managing the audio contractor from now on, and he's in charge of figuring out the music for the rest of the game. And I'm just completely taking all audio and shifting that off of my plate. In the narrative, I'm doing something similar. I'm bringing Ian on to help. Just the biggest problem with the narrative is actually not the writing necessarily. It's just the incredible amount of time it takes to script up everything that happens when you leave a level, create that screen, figure out what the screen is that should show. Because the jokes in this game, they're similar to like my GDC talks where a line is said and then you see something that conflicts with it on the screen or something like that. And there's some sort of joke with stats and stuff, but all of that is just scripted by hand. And that just takes a certain amount of time. And that's like a large amount of content for a 6 to 8 hour game, right? So I'm bringing somebody on that's going to kind of be sit next to me and Matt and like help implement stuff to just move that forward. And onboarding that person's been taking a while. Just because onboarding anybody takes a while, and because this is such a core part of the game, and because again you need people to feel like they have ownership, and so he wants to have like he's poking the narrative in different ways as well, and we all kind of have to align on the same sense of humor. And yeah, so these are the problems that are in my head right now. Like this is what's making me nervous at night, is getting this last piece of the game figured out and done.
Do you have any rules in mind with like, we don't do this, we don't like I don't know, for example, break the fourth wall, or I don't know, whatever. Do you have any of like clearly defined rules?
I don't. It's not like a list of things we don't do. It's just a list of inspirations and what the game's about and that sort of thing. In general, I think it is. There's a couple of times when we slipped up and we were just kind of like mean. Like Sarah was just mean, and that's not really the voice here that we're going for. So I do think there is a bit of that. But yeah, and I think the strongest stuff, the what people respond to the most in the playtest and the demo and that sort of thing is definitely the little treats we had, the moments where the mechanics and the VO and everything are kind of tied together. What people like is when Sarah comments on a thing you actually did, or when you the multiplayer moment when you're like scraping people off of walls and the way that feels. And so I think another thing that's kind of taking a while that slowed down production is I realized how important that was, and that we need just a ton more of that in the game. And I think that's when the scope really increased, when I realized that that's what the game was about. How do I put it? That's something that sort of has to flow through me because it connects everything, right? Like it's not just that I do the VO, but the story has to make sense for that, and also like the puzzles have to make sense for that. And that's actually one of the most fun thing in this project so far has been watching Lucas as a designer move from like, how do I put it? Like that moment when I gave him a bunch of tank stuff and I said, I need you to capture this feeling. It needs to feel like Call of Duty. And he just made a bunch of puzzles. And I'm like, none of these puzzles feel like Call of Duty. I need you to make something that feels like Call of Duty. And he just didn't get it initially. But now he can just fucking crush it. He made a puzzle that he literally made Tetris. Like he came up with this in his own. I was like, look, we need to make some classic puzzle games. He's like, what about Tetris? And he just, I don't know how to describe it. He's actually just, watching him just get increasingly more creative has been so fun. But yeah, that was something that especially initially involved a great deal of my time. I don't know where I'm going with all this. These are my anxieties. What's going on with Bonfire Peaks?
Well, it's going great. We've been in the home stretch for 90% of its development.
Video games.
No, I'm really feeling great about it. Working hard on optimization right now, making it run. We want it to run on as many computers as possible. So, a lot of tiny little cubes is a lot of triangles. And I'm kind of like, I've been trying to cut anywhere else, but that's at the end of the day, that's where the budget is going. And this is more technical than maybe you were expecting as an answer, but it's where my focus is right now. And then, yeah, just Alan and I doing level design passes and just being like, okay, well, what's left to, or like, this feels a little unexplored or underexplored, and making occasionally still like fundamental changes to logic in places, and then being like, I hope that didn't break too many things. It's like
Dude, changing the game code late in the game is just so stressful. Like, yeah. No, I know.
It's only stressful if you do what you should do and worry about finding places it's going wrong. If you just assume that you're a great coder, then it suddenly gets a lot more relaxing.
Yeah, I don't have the benefit of falling back on a QA team though, man. Like, that's the other side of this. Is like I'll change some. So at the very end of the game, all the mechanics combine. Spoilers. In different ways, and like there was a great deal of refactoring that had to happen to make that work. And I don't have a QA team, so at some like we will find out that something in like the first half of the game broke a month or two later, right? Because there's only like it's mostly just me and Lucas on this, and we don't play every puzzle every day, and so yeah, it's extremely stressful. Those big changes, and optimization is when you tend to make a lot of those big changes. So it sounds like you're bound by poly count right now. It sounds like, Corey.
Exactly. And with those changes too, like for sure bugs are a concern. But even with bugs fixed, I'm like, did we break the puzzles fundamentally in places, where you're just like, okay, either we created new unintended solutions which you can tease out, or you're like, oh, this idea just doesn't work anymore because of whatever, how this behavior now does work. And it's fun.
So you're changing actual mechanics.
Yeah,
Yeah,
like
it's like
subtleties.
there'll be like an edge case where we'll go like, oh, like I'm bad at this. I will play something and I'll have a thought at the back of my mind. Well, is this really consistent with this other behavior? Because like the way I think about mechanics is like a lot of just like making it really physical and like, okay, well, if this were like a physical system, how would this work? Um, and so I will play. And I'm like, well, is this like technically consistent with this other thing? No one will notice. No one will care. We could get away with it. But should this work the other way?
Yeah, like
Uh,
is this choice about the weight of this object consistent with this other choice? And you're like, I don't know. It feels like if it's heavy enough to do this, it should be heavy enough to do that. And it's just like, yeah, we'll spend a lot of time on those discussions.
No, that I dig it. That's important. It should feel intuitive. There's an
yeah,
intuitiveness to
and
a lot of Valence
also a
games.
lot of the time having those conversations lets you tease out more interesting mechanics that lead to more interesting puzzles. And ultimately, like I try and let that be the deciding factor of just like, okay, what's more interesting?
Wait, so what is the relationship between you two on Bonfire Peaks? Like, I mean, we talked about how I work with Lucas. How do you two work together? And yeah, what is the deal?
Well, I mean, I'm definitely like for the most part, like I'm taking care of just about everything, and then Alan will have notes about just about everything, and then Alan's also gotten in and like is just designing puzzles also, and vastly improving the game's editor, which has been super helpful. Mostly with just like I need this to be this way, and I'm like, yeah, that would be better. Okay, I'll I'll take the time to do
I
that.
haven't made many puzzles to be clear. I haven't made many puzzles. It's like I've probably made like half a dozen out of like 100. Um, but yeah, like I mean, I don't consider it my game at all in the way that like your game is your game and Lucas's game. But like I see my role as like I'm publishing the game, but I'm gonna be a really intrusive publisher. I'm gonna
Oh,
like
you're the
give
worst.
give give feedback out like any small tidbit.
But
Oh,
the difference is there is that most publishers wouldn't know better than me, and I'm like, the like when you have feedback, I either like if I fundamentally disagree with it, then we just that is what it is. But for the most part, I'm like, shit, he's right. So it's just helpful to,
yeah.
it's like,
That is such a slippery slope.
It is.
It's a different thing. Like when you give somebody, well, I mean, when you hire somebody, it's the same thing, right? Because at the end of the day, they have to do what there's always a power dynamic when money is involved. But it somehow feels weirder when you're a publisher because you're not part of the core team. And so like there's this person that gave you money and they could stop giving you money or cancel you at any time, which I guess you guys probably don't have that set up. And then they have opinions. And this is like the fucking nightmare scenario, right? But
Yeah, I think the main reason it works is just we both have a lot of respect for each other.
mhm.
Um, so like if yeah, like if I was giving feedback and Corey didn't respect that feedback, then it would just be terrible. Um,
Then you would
or
cancel the project and you'd be the evil
right.
publisher.
I mean that's also the difference is that like I'm not paying Corey to work on the game. Corey has a day job. Like I'm paying for a few contractors, but they don't actually add up to a lot of money.
Mhm.
So like that dynamic is not as skewed as it could be.
Who manages the contractors? You or Corey?
Probably manages them.
It's mostly me. The thing is too is that they're it's been talking about letting people own their work. We just hired people that we trust and who were like, like, okay, you're really talented and we know, like, just follow your instincts and I'm sure I'm gonna love it. And that's just like, there hasn't been an exception there. And it's really been about like then me making their work look good enough in the game and just being like and thankfully some of your feedback there was really helpful early on. I'm like, I'm trying to hit these visual targets and I don't know what I'm doing, and then you gave me some lighting advice that just completely like took the game to the next level. And
the lighting will fix everything as far as your visuals and create serious problems as far as your optimization. So sorry.
Yes, well, especially if you've got shadows casting on everyone, but that's
shadows
not doing that.
Yeah. Oh, so you got rid of shadows. All right. So you're bound by. Sorry, I'm still trying to figure out your technical problems. You're probably not bound by shader complexity or transparency.
Can we fix the performance issues by just zooming the camera in more?
Yeah, no, sure. Just make it a really claustrophobic thing. I did consider that. Or like, limiting it more than it is limited. There's also that by default the game is very pretentiously in a widescreen format, which also buys me a little bit of like I don't have to draw anything in the top and the bottom of the screen, but that's a setting you can change, so I can't rely on that. But yeah, no, it's really been just a question of making judgment calls about, okay, is this object really contributing that much visually for its poly count? And do we really need two of those there, or can I just have one there? Or like, think about scale also. Mary, who's like the lead environment artist, has been really pushing for like she wants as many cubes in there as possible because her work she's not bound by that because she makes stills and prints that where it takes 7 hours to render her one frame, and I'm like, I can't. Yeah, like I'm in a very different world here where I'm gonna try to make it so everybody's got at least 30 frames a second, and that's just a different reality. And I've definitely felt her be like a little. It's been a compromise for her to like. And I'm like, okay, the background art. Okay, we have a scale for the central art, and then things get a little bigger and a little bigger in terms of the size of the voxels. And that's bought us some performance budget, but man, it's tough because I want to do her work justice, and I want her to not, cringe at any like, oh, I wish there was more detail there or whatever it is. But,
yeah. Can you fall back to cards like for the stuff in the background? I haven't looked in your game in a while, but I feel like you can move the camera, but I mean, you could. I feel like there's got to be a way to fall back to just plain cards with a texture on them and some transparency for some of the stuff in the background.
I mean, maybe we'll have to have a conversation about that, and you can advise me, because I definitely would like to not sacrifice aesthetically and just like find other ways.
So a lot of times when you see a tree in the distance in a video game, what it actually is a plane with a tree drawn on it that's a sprite that'll face the camera, right? And so you can just create some of the, I'm making this sound trivial. Just change the background art for your entire game, Corey. With now, this late in the game, I'm sure there'll be no knock-on effects.
But there's like, then you get a billboard effect when you move the camera and stuff, right? You don't see the actual depth. I mean, I guess practically, if people aren't just looking at the puzzle in the middle, and they're focusing on trees off in the distance, and maybe have different problems, but I would suspect that would make a difference visually. I don't know. Maybe
it depends. Yeah, it depends on how far away it is from your camera and how I would have to look at the specific we'll have to talk after this. Like, if you show me a screenshot.
Yeah, you have a lot of availability, right? To fix other people's games.
Oh God.
I can use it.
Maybe.
Yeah, you're not stressed at all.
No, this is fine. Yeah, you're right. I should stop signing up for stuff. I'm trying. It's hard though, because this is fun. Tech art is the fun stuff. Like, and there's certain things where, like, if it's an interesting problem, I can usually find a way to squeeze onto it. Though I have to stop that. I do need to ship LabRat. I did sign something saying I would ship LabRat pretty soon, and I'm probably gonna have to renege on that, which is a bummer.
And yeah, Joseph, to using some normal mapping to fake the voxel effect. Yeah, I've entertained that as well. Anyways, we'll see. It's also though, like, yeah, these optimization things are undertakings of their own, and yeah, it's just like, and like, hey, if we can get away with it without adding a month to the work or whatever, that would be great.
Yeah.
I mean, the other alternative, if you just pay somebody else $50,000 to optimize your game, like that's what you do in AAA, right?
In AAA, you pay a lot more than $50,000, and you don't. Yeah. And you usually have people on site that do that. And there's different things, like the optimization pass. So let me think. On BioShock Infinite, we finished the game. Content lock was a good several months before cert, which was a good several months before ship. And we were profiling the entire time. So you have people that are worried about this pretty early on. Just to make sure that we'll at some point hit on target. AAA is just a different beast. AAA, you throw money at everything.
You're right. Making the game and then only 6 months before launch realizing that you need to optimize. That's a AA problem.
That's a very indie problem.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's the way it should be, because if you only have so many resources and you need to spend, the hardest thing is making a game that's fun and good. And it doesn't make any sense to optimize something until you've gotten that anyways.
Well, exactly. You're doing the work twice and or more because you're optimizing things that just won't be there later. And yeah, so there's some balance.
There's a lot of, I mean, I actually think it's a trap. I think it's really fun to fall into how problems. It's so soothing to do the how problems. When the what problems are the ones that are difficult and challenging and draining in a sort of creative way. Figuring out what you're doing. And why you're doing it, and nailing that is that's the hard job. That's the creative job, and a lot of times you'll run from that, and because it's so much more soothing to figure out how are we going to do this. It's so much more soothing to fall into like the kind of technical stuff, because that's the kind of, those are questions where you'll do it if you've answered a how question properly. Then it's like a Boolean. You have the satisfaction of you did a thing and you know it's good. Whereas a what problem, you can think you're doing something, you've made a thing, you think it's good, you realize it's not, you're never really sure. It's far more, what's the word? You don't know for sure if you've nailed it or not. I don't know how else to put it.
Yeah, I think it depends how you're wired and whatever, so the how can be draining for me, that's for sure. But yeah, it just depends on the problem, and you take them as they come, and eventually you finish a game, hopefully.
Maybe. You will. You're close. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I really do.
We're both close, right?
We are both close. So is this what you're doing full time, Alan?
Me?
Working on Bonfire?
I have many things I'm juggling. But like day to day, like Bonfire is something I'm not really thinking about, like 95% of the time. I have a lot of small stuff with a Monsters Expedition that just adds up. Like we have a patch for Apple Arcade that has been pending for a while that we're hopefully going to get out. I should actually poke the programmer who's doing the last bits and get a status update on that actually. But yeah, like our last patch on iOS was at the end of September, so that's definitely overdue. We have some other commitments with that. We have like just lots of small things that aren't really exciting, but that have to get done.
So you'll be working on
game.
You'll be working on a monsters expedition until you die.
I mean, to some degree, you're always working on every game until you die, because people like those Steam forums aren't going away. But yeah, and then I'm also doing some biz dev stuff, and I'm also working like I haven't started a new project, but I have agreed to publish somebody else's game. So I'm now publishing 2 external projects, and that one is very, very early.
Are you?
Yeah. So,
is this your style? Are you going to be really hands-on with everybody you publish?
So this one I'm trying to be less hands-on, just because I know this person less well, and I feel like I don't quite have that dynamic. But like I am definitely involved, and like I'm discussing things on a mechanical level. Okay, like we're working out what mechanics we want. Well, like I have these opinions. Like I'm not going to overrule you, but like here's your list of mechanics we could add to this. Here's my list of mechanics we could add to this. Let's just throw some ideas out into the pot and see what sticks. So yeah, it's too soon to say how involved I'm going to be on that project, but I'm not uninvolved.
I see. Dom is asking what the game is that you're publishing.
I'm not saying it.
There it is.
It's a grid-based puzzle game.
But yeah, it's very much up your alley. So, like, surely, again, though, there's going to be that kind of that you and the developer have similar taste, and so there's less friction than there otherwise be with some publisher-developer relationships.
I see. Okay. This is going to be interesting. At some point, Alan, you're going to publish a game from if you keep publishing puzzle games, at some point you're going to publish a game with somebody who does not know you very well. And this is I don't know. We'll see where this goes. I'm excited to see Alan's.
You're worried. You think it's going to come crashing down?
I don't know. I mean, you can do each thing, play this by ear. I mean, what you're doing is actually very similar to Team 17. They do co-development deals and publishing deals, and they can flip between them, kind of. And you're basically a co-developer that offers like kind of game management and puzzle design expertise on top of publishing, which is that it could actually work. I would, if you were, how do I put this? Yeah, it depends. I mean, this just goes back to the same thing as managing people. I could imagine Paradox doing that too. I know they don't. They're more hands-off. But like if I was making a strategy game and people from Paradox had a certain opinion and Paradox was publishing my game, I would listen to them.
Yeah, ultimately, like hopefully you only ever work with someone who you would want to listen to. Like,
no.
I guess for the right, they just drive truckloads of money up to your house. They can disagree with all you want.
Or sometimes you just want to, well, it's not truckloads of money. It's like sometimes you want to make a thing and the only people that will publish it are, it'll happen. I can tell you terrible stories. I pitched Kine to a publisher this was a deal I turned down, which would have made me actually a millionaire. Kind of. It's complicated.
A millionaire on paper?
Nah, it's complicated. I can't say anything without giving away way too much. But I definitely...
Well, you're going to give us the gossip later.
Nah, here's what I can say publicly. I definitely pitched Kine to a publisher, and they had... Before, they were interested in investing. They were interested in giving me like a signing bonus. They were interested in quite punching up the budget, but they wanted a lot of control with it. Specifically, they wanted to completely overhaul the art style, and they wanted me to crowdsource the music. And at the time, I already had Shell, and I had a full soundtrack. And I was like, this is a game about musicians. About a musician trying to find their big break. Like, a bunch of musicians trying to find their big break. I already hired a musician. They've already done the soundtrack. This is their first gig out of school. Like, nah, man, we're not gonna crowdsource the music. Like, and it just, there's other things like this. There's always stories like this of publishers with ideas. And I don't mean to shit on what you're doing, Alan. I think you will be one of the good ones.
I mean, everyone thinks they're one of the good ones until they get corrupted by power, right?
Yeah. Well.
So you're looking forward to that day?
Well, you can't hate something that's inevitable. You have to accept it.
You will live long enough to be the villain. Richter from chat, I don't know if they're still around, they asked a question of us. They said, do you do any kind of Ryan Clark style risk mitigation before committing to a concept? Researching similar game sales, looking for overlap, testing GIFs on social media, etc.? Or do you just go with your gut and industry experience? Let's throw that one to Alan.
I would say my back catalog is my risk mitigation. And like I haven't, but the thing is I haven't tested that. Like I have a gut instinct that having that back catalog will help games that I'm publishing get greater visibility, but I don't yet know if that's true.
Well, you've definitely built an audience. There's people that respect you immensely as a puzzle designer.
Yeah, but the audience that knows who I am is a very small subset of the audience of people who have played my games.
True.
Like I think it helps, but I don't think it guarantees. Like Bonfire Peaks is not going to do as well as a Monsters Expedition.
Now you tell me?
Sorry.
We had very different conversations behind closed doors.
This is him living long enough to become the villain.
I mean, like, if it does, then great. Like, if I can just like, if it's possible to leverage like 100% of that audience to the next game, then great, fantastic. But in all likelihood, like the core audience of Bonfire Peaks is people who are already kind of aware of Bonfire Peaks, and like I'm going to help a few more people who would be interested in that game find out that the game exists in the first place. But I think it's very hard to push a game to like a very wide audience. So yeah, like.
So how did you? I think what Richter is kind of getting at is like, did you? Test GIFs on social media. I don't know. Bonfire Peaks was already kind of out there in the world, so you pretty much knew what you were getting into with that one.
Yeah, I mean, like the thing that made me suggest to Koi, hey, I guess I could try publishing this game, is just having played the game and knowing that the core rule set was like interesting and surprising in ways that I appreciate as a designer and I appreciate as a player. So
yeah, it's like that none of us are making decisions based on what's safe in terms of like, I bet this will be a hit and that's why I'm like going down that road. You're just like, I'll do what's interesting to me, and hopefully that lines up with enough people that and that's enough.
Yeah. I think Richter specifically called out Ryan Clark, and so I think if you follow Ryan Clark, you'll know damn well none of us follow that philosophy, because if we followed Ryan Clark's philosophy, none of us would be making Sokoban style puzzle games. So the answer to your question would be no by default.
Yeah, like I guess speaking of publishers pushing in weird directions, like I had one meeting with a publisher for Monsters Expedition who asked, so would it be possible to make this game work from a first-person perspective? And like, it's a silly question, and the answer is no, not at all. But it gets to this kind of thing of like, Well, yeah, like first person puzzle games demonstrably have a much wider audience and are a much better bet. So yeah, what like if you can make a game and like if you're doing that kind of market research and you're thinking, okay, what kind of game do I want to make, then that is the kind of thing that you can think about and go, well, yeah, this is a plausible bet.
Well, yeah,
I'm
there's.
reminded
Oh,
of
sorry.
your just Gwen, of your Venn diagram of the games you want to make and the games you're equipped to make and the games that'll
Yeah,
sell well, and just how they none of those three can
yeah, they don't.
quite overlap.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. Yeah, I'm well aware of this too, of what my skill set, what I should be doing given my skill set versus what I'm doing. Like, do puzzle games really? Puzzle games might actually benefit from having a person with a background in AAA animation, but like probably I should be making something like Untitled Goose Game that would really fit my skill set better, but I have no intention of ever doing that. Whatever. I go in a circle like this all the time. But I was thinking,
It would profit from your skill set better, but I mean, those are maybe two different things.
yeah, this what's that? What you want to make matters a lot. I do this every day, all the time. Like I have to enjoy it, and I've sat down like Richter said, and I've tried the Ryan Clark thing. Like I've tried to optimize for that Venn diagram, and every time I start a project like that, I just how do I put it? Okay, so here's the advice I would give Richter, I guess, because I am a person. I left AAA. The first game I made, I founded a company with several other people, and we made a roguelike. Roguelikes are really hot. At the time, it was the right thing to do. This was shit like 7 years ago. We had a lot of hubris because we came from AAA. They published that we were working on this in Game Informer. We had a successful Kickstarter based on the idea that we would make a very beautiful roguelike. And when we launched, it completely flopped. And it did turn around eventually because we got really lucky with our publisher and the Switch and blah, blah, blah. But at launch, it flopped, and we talked in the postmortem, and none of us really enjoyed roguelikes. And we weren't really making a game in a genre that we had experience in or that we particularly loved or anything like that. And we did on paper exactly what we were supposed to do. And it didn't work out. And I'll tell you, it felt like shit. And whenever I'm making a decision now, I tend to think about the reality is if you look at what Ryan Clark says, even the games, I'm glad you like The Flame of Flood, it is gorgeous. And I love the soundtrack, and I did enjoy working on parts of it. I would argue that I could pick that game apart because I was on it, man. Like, it was a roguelike where you had to run around and survive. It was a survival game, but it was also stunningly beautiful. But you could never stop and look at the beautiful art because you had to run around. Like, there was a lot of just core fundamental things in that game that I regret, right? And the truth is I don't enjoy survival roguelikes. And I don't think any of us really did. I know none of us really did. And then when we nerfed it, we made it a much softer, gentler experience so you could experience the music and the art and people liked it more, right? And it did eventually reach success, so on and so forth. But where was I going with this? If you look at the game, Ryan Clark gives great advice, and I totally think you can look at that. But what you have to keep in mind is even if you do everything right, even if you follow the metrics and the data and you look into it and you do everything right and you make the game that you statistically could make, most likely you will still fail. Like most games fail, even games in the most hot, like look at the sexiest, hottest genre there is, 80% of the games in that fail, right? And so what you should do at the beginning of a project when you're looking at your different concepts is you think, what is this going to feel like if this fails? Because failure is the most likely option. And if this fails, how do you want to go down, right? Like, do you want to go down working on something you love, something that really inspires you, that you believe in a genre that you adore? Or do you want to go down working on something that was technically the right thing to do? And if you do the second one, people will say, oh, that's such a shame. You did everything right. You'll get a ton of sympathy. If you do the first one, people will be like, well, obviously you failed. You made a puzzle game, that'll never pan out. You'll go down as a cautionary tale. But I would argue it's better to go down as a cautionary tale and have fun. Because as somebody who's been on both sides of it, going down as doing the right thing and having everybody feel bad for you does not feel any better at all.
I think there's two things there too with like, for one, it's that if you're studying the market, like when you're starting the game and then the game takes 3 years, it's a different world 3 years later. And your market research might not matter anymore. There was a time when puzzle platformers were like a solid bet, and then that ended, and I hope there's another wave there because I love it. But another thing too is because you can count on your game failing. I saw Zach Gage give a bit of advice that I wish I had seen years ago, which is that like expect the game to fail, but making and finishing a game is a really impressive thing, and then you can use that to leverage your money making situation so that if it's not making the sequel to that game, you're at least doing something cool with your days and are stable. And that ended up being my path, and like everywhere along the way I was like, oh, there's another failure, and then it was just like, no, that's actually just, if you expect it to fail and you're like, well, this will be just like part of my portfolio that I can leverage, and then I don't know, it makes the bar for success a lot more attainable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This kind of
thing portfolio
from the Steam chat. Any advice to folks starting to dabble in indie game dev? And like low expectations, doing it part time rather than committing yourself to it financially.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and finish things, like work towards finishing things, because like everyone makes the same mistake, and everyone gets this advice and then ignores it, but that you like start with something way too big, and finishing a game is a really important part of that experience that I should have worked towards sooner, because it's that I just spent like 3 years working on a game that no one here will ever play. So yeah, but again, hindsight.
Yeah. Oh, where were we? I had thoughts before on something you said, and I forgot what it was. We were talking about publishers, and you were bringing up. So I invest, or I sit on a board that invests in games. We actually had to pause that for a while. What's another way to put this? Other things publishers are worried about that you may not expect is just they have to spend a certain amount of money in a given quarter. So they're more concerned about making sure that you launched a specific time for the sake of their portfolio rather than making a good game sometimes. So some publishers, I think it becomes a lot more difficult to slip if you sign with certain publishers. Another thing I've encountered, here it is. So when I was pitching Lab Rat, I did have interest from one publisher specifically that only publishes like narrative games. And they loved it, and they thought Lab Rat was great. They really wanted to invest in it, but they mostly really also wanted me to add cutscenes and things like that in order to make it something that would fit their portfolio better. And I'm not going to add cutscenes to Lab Rat. They also just weren't going to give me enough money to make that make sense anyway. So I think one thing I would worry about with your thing, Alan, is what happens if you get a game that's good that could be thinky, but the person involved doesn't want to make it thinky? And would you be okay publishing that? Or do you just feel like that's outside your wheelhouse, so you wouldn't?
I mean, I feel like that wouldn't fit my approach, probably. Like, if I don't want to make it thinky, then I don't know if I have the expertise to help them make sure that it's good. Mm-hmm. And like. Because there's never going to be a situation where you're 100% confident that no matter what happens through development, this game is going to get finished and it's going to be good. And I guess I see, like, I'm like with Bonfire Peaks, I'm publishing it because I can see that it's a good game, and I can see that there are things that I can do to help to help it get seen by an audience that will appreciate it. Mm-hmm. And I'd say that's the main thing I'm bringing to Bonfire Peaks, is just slightly increasing the likelihood that it reaches the audience that it deserves. And like, as well as that, I'm also like giving game design advice and feedback and like trying to help it be a better game. But like it would be a good game whether or not I was publishing it, and also I'd be giving that feedback whether or not I was publishing it. I'm like probably not to the same degree, but like.
Yeah, I should say like my previous two games also benefited a lot from Alan's feedback, and he just didn't get any credit for it in the end.
Okay.
I mean, special things, but I mean, it's like in this case, it's just like I'm like, you know, he has a additional design credit or whatever we want to call it, and then also bringing in Seren to help with businessy things that I don't want to think about, and that like it's just like, oh, like I can trust somebody who knows way better than I do to guide this, and who has experience in places that I don't.
Yeah. So I can see this. This is fun. This is similar to kind of like Finji that makes games and publishes games too. From people, Finji kind of publishes games by like their friends and that sort of thing. Alan, are you thinking you're going to keep it small, or do you think you'll like? Will there ever be a time when people can submit games to you and ask for publishing?
Like we've kind of chatted about this off stream, and like I don't think I have the bandwidth for that, and I don't think I'd want to. I don't think I'm capable of letting go to the degree that I would need to scale up. Mm-hmm. Like, on one level, it makes a lot of sense. It's like, okay, well, instead of working with like 2 teams at a time, I like if I wasn't so involved, then I could just identify games which look like they're going to be good and say, hey, would you like some money in exchange for some marketing? And that's like a pretty good deal. And there's no shortage of people who could benefit from something like that. But like at the point where I'm going to be putting my name on something, I'm very heavily invested on it being the best thing it can be. And I don't know how to do that in a way that scales up.
It's also just doing the thing that you enjoy doing every day. Like if your entire job was just marketing other people's games, right. I would hate that. I don't know about. I suspect you would hate that too.
Absolutely, yeah. And so the only way to scale up would be to outsource that to somebody else, and then that's even more creative. Like being okay with somebody else. I need to find somebody who's like I trust intimately to do the job that I'm currently doing and do it as well as I would do it. Yeah. And that's not even related to enjoyment. Like there's lots of things that I do that I don't enjoy, but also I'm never going to give, or not never, but like that I don't give up control of, even though I don't enjoy it, because I'd be more unhappy with it being in somebody else's hands.
Like what?
Even if, well, like business and marketing stuff. Yeah. It's not stuff that I enjoy, but I need to have like at least some level of input and insight into what's going on there. And then at the point where you're kind of involved, you're basically fully involved. Like. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've never successfully had somebody else write a press release for a game that's early in development. Like, because nobody will understand the game like you will, and I don't know if that's possible. Or, yeah, the marketing stuff is hard.
Well, especially when so much of what makes games interesting is that it's like nonverbal, and then when someone puts it into words, it's like I know I'm like, yeah, I can. You can obsess over finding the right tone there also, and how to speak about something in a way that's like shows what's interesting about it to you, but is also going to be appealing to somebody who doesn't know the thing. And there's a question in Twitch for Gwen. How do you identify lines you don't want to cross for a publisher, like not adding cutscenes to Labrat? Some seem pretty easy to identify, but others less so.
I've never successfully worked with a publisher. Like, Okay, so part of this is I have this fantasy in my head, right? Where I'll find a publisher and then I won't have to worry about the marketing or the biz dev side of things. Like I won't have to pitch platforms. All I have to do is get a publisher on board and then they'll fund the game and I can just sit in this zen-like state of making the game, right? And so I've tried pitching to publishers before and it's never been a good deal. It's always been it's always something where they're like, they need at least 6 months to evaluate the project. And by then, like my dev cycles are, by the time you're at a place where you're pitching a publisher, you've spent 6 months on it. The dev cycle is probably going to be a year and a half. They need 6 months to even figure out if they want to invest. And so like, no, by the time you're on board, it's too fucking late. This is just going to turn into me bitching about publishers in general. So how do I identify the lines I won't cross? I mean, if a publisher has ideas about the content of your game and they're not Alan, you should probably run. Like, if you're making a strategy game and Paradox has ideas, that's cool. If you're making a puzzle game and Alan has ideas, that's cool. If you're making a game for, I don't know, what's a big one? EA. If you're pitching to Private Division, I'm only saying this because I've never pitched to Private Division, and Private Division has ideas about your game, that's a big red flag. There better be a lot of money in that. Because as soon as somebody gives you money, that's a relationship.
And of course it makes sense, like, you know, there's like the cliche of like artists who wants a ton of money for something, but then wants the person who gave money to have no input. And it's like, well, they're paying for the thing. Like, it makes sense that they're like, I would think it would be better if you did this. Or like, even if it's not just purely about the game will sell more, they might have different creative instincts. And that's tricky to navigate and understandable that they want that.
Well, I think the part of the problem is so often, I can tell you famous stories without giving names. A friend of mine, close friend of mine, signed a deal about $2 million for a game, was making the game. They were most of the way through development. The publisher, there's a thing publishers, especially the bigger ones, do sometimes where they'll pay a group of focus testers to play it and give feedback. And what they found was that this game, that they'll have people write mock reviews of the game while it's in development. And then they'll look at those mock reviews and make decisions, which works for some games, right? But there's some games where the fun of it really doesn't come together until a little bit later on. Anyway, this is a thing that happens. The publisher went back to my friend and said, this is looking like it's only going to be a 60 Metacritic based on what we found. We need to make drastic changes. We've had a powwow internally. We think you should take your multiplayer game and remove the multiplayer and make it a narrative single player game. And it's like, at that point, you paid for a game and you decided you wanted a different game. And I don't know if you're using this like Metacritic thing a year before launch as an excuse because you want to rebalance your portfolio, or if you actually, feel this way. But either way, it's not happening. We have a team of people to make a multiplayer game right now, right? We don't have
which
a narrative.
You would think is a safer bet than a single player narrative.
Whole situation in that story that I cannot get into. But yeah, it's I've never worked with anybody that dreadful. But it is there's bad things that can happen. Generally, I would avoid any, personally, because I went indie to make games that I enjoy working on and that I would play, I would avoid giving up creative control to a publisher. But there are instances, especially if you're working with a publisher that's also a developer, somebody like Alan, somebody like Paradox, somebody that has expertise in your field. If you're working with a publisher that is actually also a developer, then it's a different situation. The problem is there's a lot of publishers that have never been developers, especially at these larger companies. They come out of, they start as junior publishers and they become senior publishers, and their job is following the market. And they feel like game designers in their own, to themselves. And they'll be the ones that are like, you should really add a step counter to your puzzle game, because that seems so smart to somebody that's never made a puzzle game and doesn't understand
Yeah.
exactly what Alan's making, you know?
Right,
I
or
heard
they'll
somebody
read a
describe
Dharma
that as
Sutra article and they're like, oh, like loot boxes are all the rage, then they're really profitable. You should add loot boxes to your first person puzzle game or whatever.
Yeah. And I mean, at that point, it's great when a publisher, if you're hiring a publisher, if you're working with a publisher because you want funding and you want marketing, then it is good to make sure that you like the way that they're going to market your game, and to make sure that, and to take their advice when it comes to marketing. But see if you kind of have to feel these situations out. It's always going to be weird. Like, there's a power dynamic both in getting money and giving money, which is another thing that's fun to talk about. Like, so if somebody, how do I put this? If Microsoft invests in your if like ID at Xbox invests in an exclusivity deal for your product, they are more likely to put your product on the front page of the Xbox because there's a person inside of Microsoft that placed a bet on you and wants to look good to his boss, right? And so it's actually a good idea to take money from Microsoft if you want to be in the Xbox for an exclusivity deal, for instance. There's a certain amount of game theory in that way too. But yeah, when there's a certain reality when you're on the other side of the fence. Alan doesn't have to worry about this. He's a developer. He comes from this perspective. He will always be more of a developer than a publisher in my mind. But like, publishers have to be very careful because I think a lot of times they don't realize how desperate the situation is with a developer. They don't know what it feels like to know that your company is going to fold in like 4 months without this deal. They don't feel that sense of urgency necessarily. It's always in their benefit to wait longer. It's always in their benefit to ask for more. They often don't realize that having a request or an idea, you need to be, as a publisher, very careful to couch that as this is a request or an idea. But I'm not married to it, and I don't really care that much, because you're giving somebody money, and they will most likely jump to the conclusion that they need to make the person that's giving the money happy, or they won't get money anymore.
Yeah, that's actually exactly the line that I'm worried about crossing with the second unannounced publishing project. Because like, yeah, it's that dynamic of like, well, like I have opinions, but I want this to be your game, but like, and like, it's just really hard to communicate that, and I'm not like massively worried about that I have been overstepping that line, but I am worried that I could, and I could do that in ways that I'm not knowing that I've done it.
Yeah. Well, how do you empower your employees to push back?
I don't know.
Because I mean, you give them money, and they sometimes come to you. Like, I'm sure, like at some point, your employees come to you and say, you give them feedback, and they're like, no, I really strongly feel it should be like this. Like, what do you do?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I see that as a different dynamic, I think, because when it's people who are working on like an internally developed game, then I want that as much as possible to feel like a collaboration rather than a employment where I'm like the boss and I'm calling all the shots. And you can't always get there, and there's always going to be some of that power dynamic. But like, fundamentally, that's my goal. Whereas with a published project, it can feel like it can be okay to feel like that collaboration vibe, and it cannot. And the line is really blurry.
And it's hard because you're not there with them day to day. You don't see, especially now, like you're never going to see them face to face, really. Communicating via emails.
I've never worked with anyone who I've like been working in the same place as them more than like 1 day a week.
Yeah, it's hard to say. There was a time when I swore we could never really give up the office at the molasses flood, because those 2 days of working in the office meant a lot. And now I'm so used to the other side of it. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I was crazy back then or not. It's hard to say.
Yeah, it comes down to whether your communication is effective, and if you're like you, Alan, you mentioned earlier, having compatible collaborative styles is like makes all the difference there too.
Yeah, having the same communication styles.
Well, and that's one thing too. One thing that made me very grateful for Alan's feedback from the start is I don't know if you know this. You can be quite blunt.
Oh, I can.
Me? No,
Yeah,
definitely not.
Yeah, and like I'm so grateful for that because people will tiptoe around negative feedback sometimes in a way that it just does a disservice to the thing. Obviously, you want to like be human and not hurt people or whatever, but you also, you flat out have told me sometimes like this puzzle is about this, and you've illustrated that in the worst way possible. And I'm like, okay, yeah, this is like, it doesn't feel nice in the moment, but it leads to a better puzzle. And yeah, that's can be very crucial.
You know what I haven't been blunt about recently with Bonfire Peaks? I still really don't love the cell shading. What's it called? What's the filter you're putting on everything? The color filter.
The dithering.
Yeah, I still really don't love that dithering.
All right, well, we can have a conversation about that.
But also, it's your game. I don't care. And it does look good. I just think it would. There are ways of tweaking that so it looks better. And I think one way would be to remove it.
All right. Well, we'll do some ABs and compare. It's funny because it's something too that this is again getting back to technical, but it looks so different at different resolutions too.
Interesting.
So that's something that I should try to avoid and have it be consistent regardless.
Yeah, I have that. I have that problem real bad with Labrat too. There's certain effects that just do not look good. That look amazing on my brilliant high def 4K monitors and do not look very good on a laptop, for instance.
Actually, I've been meaning to check in on Labrat and because I know for a while you had performance issues on low-end computers, and the animation, like the movement animation, would be kind of awkward on slower computers. Did you get to iterate on that a lot with the beta?
I had to, how do I put this? Snight and I are tight. We work together at Irrational. We're, AAA artists will make the game look very good and will fight optimization. This is something where, again, I will not go in and change something. I have to get them to go in and change it. And so there were many, many conversations and proofs and so forth. But yes, an optimization pass was done. We have actually done another pass since then, so I should probably profile again and see where we are. It is also something that I tend to push off a bit. This is a very AAA thing, but you optimize at the end, for art, for everything. And I know we can get this, we can get the frame rate back into something reasonable. There's not that many triangles on the screen here, man. I can just check a couple. If the hatchet has to come down, I can check some bools in the post-proc, and Snight will be really sad. And we'll just decrease the shadow quality until such time as the game runs at rate. And I know how to do that because my background is in tech art, so it's fine. But we'll hold off on that for a bit.
If you expose all that in the settings too and let people, I guess that's another concern probably for artists though, is you don't want the player you want the player to have the freedom to tweak settings so that the game performs well, but then not so that you're like, oh god, that's a terrible or whatever it is, if the shadow quality being quite low is
there's other things you want to sorry. You want the game to look good on low end PCs, and so there's something like, what if I just turn off all the Niagara effects, but then it looks like absolute garbage on low end PCs because I don't have a fallback, and so it's important to not just like turn things off, but also to have like a backup sort of thing that happens. That's that's the entire concept of LODs and that sort of thing, right? Of just LODing everything down by one on low end PCs or something like that. There's definitely a lot of that sort of thing. What else was I going to say? Yeah, it's just work. It's work to expose that stuff. It's the biggest problem is actually a lot of people don't mess with their settings, and I try to use the built-in Unreal thing of like detecting people's hardware and setting the settings automatically based on it, but I don't think it's working right now. And so we have to set a default at some point, and the default is I'm just probably going to default it to low at some point if it can't detect hardware. I think right now it defaults to high. And I think if you set, I thought something really interesting was I installed, what was that game? I installed a game over the weekend, the Plague Inc., and it came up at the lowest imaginable settings, windowed, like with like potato quality. And it was so bad that I even on my laptop, I immediately knew like, oh, I have to go into the options and fix it. I think there's something about that, of forcing people to go into the options and fixing it, that might be smart. So set it not just on like kind of medium low, because people who have medium, if they have a high-end PC, they won't go in and fix it. Set it on garbage.
If you set it to 800 by 600, then people are gonna really pay attention. 800
by 600, like so bad you can't. Because I loaded up the Plague Inc. and I'm like, and I'm on my laptop here, which is not that strong, right? Like it's not my PC. I loaded up Plague Inc. and I couldn't read the text because it was so pixelated, and I was like, oh wow. Clearly I have to change the settings. I think I need to just implement just garbage quality and set that as the default. That might be the right solution. Rockstar Games managed to make it. Oh, sorry. Just catching up with the chat.
Yeah, Rockstar Games, definitely that comparable studio to our efforts.
I don't think we've told the chat. Like, did they realize Corey is a part-time indie dev with a small team? Alan, you're full-time, and do you have a full-time staff at Draknek now?
No.
All contractors.
I'm the only employee. Seren does biz dev and is the only other person like working on Dragnet projects at the moment, other than like small bits and pieces. But even she is like part-time working on other projects too. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's nice. It's nice to drop down to being solo again in between projects, so you can breathe, reflect, think of what you want to do next. I think even if I scale, it'll always be something where I drop down to like a very small core team, like 10% of the team, in between projects, and then we scale up using largely contractors. I like that as a strategy. I think there's an argument that that's a terrible way to work because you don't build team cohesion with the same team. You don't get used to working with the same people. But I've found, like, personally, I haven't found that to be the case. Like, the freelancers I've worked with in the past, or the contractors or whoever, we have a good enough relationship that I always tend to work with them again later if it worked out well and that sort of thing. And I think you found the same.
Yeah, mostly. Plus, you know what the other what the really good way of not getting to work with somebody again is? It's running out of money because you have to pay people in between projects.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
And the whole feed the beast thing that becomes a driving force, and yeah.
Yeah, and you can't have too many cooks in the kitchen when you're trying to figure out what the voice is of a game. You know, like when you're trying to figure out what it is you're making. Yeah. Are you looking for game suggestions? No, we are not. Oh wait. Oh, I'm sorry.
Finish reading this thing.
I get that. I get tweets like about once a week of like, I have a great game idea that you can make if you give me a percentage. Like, do you guys get those DMs? It's just like,
no.
It's like, I'm not gonna. Yeah, I'm sure you have a great idea, rando on the internet. Sorry, rando on the internet. Didn't mean that.
Sorry, rando on the internet. 1, 2, 3.
So the thing about just to circle back real quick on optimization and how like Rockstar is able to do and whoever else is able to do these things that clearly are technically more ambitious and then they run well. It's often like some people might think it's a choice between, oh, you have A or B as two ways of doing one job and you just chose the wrong one, so your game is poorly optimized. But really, it's like a huge investment of effort and time to do things in a way more complicated way so that it'll perform better. So it's really just like it's a lot of work, and it may seem like it's just about making the right choices in development, but there's so much more to it.
I remember, this was like a couple week long project I did at Irrational near the end of the dev cycle. You will probably understand this, Corey. So in BioShock Infinite, you have player hands, and the hands hold guns, and you have animations for the hands and the guns for every gun, right? And so the logical way to set that up is that there's a tree, an animation tree that controls the player hands, and that tree references every animation that could play in the player hands, right? Like all the gun animations. But the problem is not every gun is in every level, and we had memory problems. And an easy way to solve our memory problems was to say that we only load the animations for the guns that are in the level, which means we needed a way for the guns, the gun objects, to reference the animations that would be playing on the player hands. And we just had to change how things were loaded and just change the entire underlying structure of how the animation tree is set up so that they could take like a wildcard animation that would be given to them by a gun. And it made a much more convoluted, ridiculous system, but it saved so much memory in the end. And that's the kind of crap you do. Like it's that's the stuff that happens when you close out a game that takes forever, and that it really is an art getting this stuff to kind of work.
It is, and it's also just like it's like so much effort for something that's invisible, and that's hard to be excited about when you're working on it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know. We were excited. I think it's more exciting. There's something just inherently more fun about being on a big team that it's hard to explain to people who haven't done it, because like you guys will, a lot of people in the indie community will talk about how important it is to have a community of people you can share with, right? And how important it is to be able to share your work with your peers. When you're at a large studio, you have that at all times. And so everybody else is celebrating when you're on a group of people, 10 people, cross-disciplinary. Everybody's trying to find a way to score memory. And you figured out how to save a crap ton of memory. And so we're all working towards this shared goal. And you, Corey, you figured something out. And everybody's so happy for you because you're on this team of people who's trying to do this. And so it is still fulfilling on a large team. It's one of the things I miss about AAA sometimes.
And I can imagine the potential for causing problems on the other side of the game with those kinds of solutions too, which like we, at the scale of the games we're making.
If you're a hero one week, it doesn't matter if you're the villain the next week.
Yeah. Oh God. And I can go to the other side of that because we would use entirely outsourced QA, right? And so like we'd people in India and China testing the game and so forth. And they get paid by the bug, which is the worst system in the world, right? And so what would happen is like if you made this optimization and now the hand and the gun are the gun is misaligned with the hand, and that's true across every gun in the game. The QA department is going to give you 50 bugs, one for each gun in the game, because that's how they get as much money as possible. And it reached a point like of ridiculousness where at one point I got a bug for every hat in the game, and it takes a long time to do this, but I had to contest each bug and mark as duplicate so that they wouldn't get paid, because like at some point you have to like, rather than just fix it and close out all of them with a checkbox, you have to take the much longer process of marking as a duplicate in the system just to make the bullshit stop. Like, no, I'm just griping about the old days of optimization. I didn't optimize kind at all, right? Like, I did nothing.
I can tell.
Ouch.
Wait, no, that can't be true, because it runs way better than it did really on, for me at least, or maybe.
Oh, I mean, there was a couple of things I did to fix like like I had to fix some bugs in the shaders and stuff like that. But what I mean is like when I was porting it to the different platforms, there was no work to get it to run on the Switch, for instance.
Nice.
That's impressive.
Because I used no lighting in the entire game. No lighting and no physics. Makes all the difference.
Living the dream.
Yeah. Anyway.
Going back to the question from Darwin Evolution, are we looking for game suggestions to potentially feature in the spotlight for Thinky Puzzle Games Discord? Not actively, but if you have games that you think are worth attention, just post them generally in the Thinky Puzzle Games Discord. And if I'm basically the person who makes the spotlight decisions, so if I think that you're right, then I will maybe choose it.
Yeah, I like it makes sense when there's some exciting new game for that to be in the spotlight, but I like those ones that are like, hey, this game from 6 years ago that not a lot of people played, and that's fun.
Yeah. I probably should have made, like, it's weird, like maybe we should just switch away from a monthly system and just have it like be more ad hoc, because like it was probably going to be Solas for this month, and then the collaboration game released at the end of January. I'm like, well, I guess that's the next spotlight game, I guess.
You could have two. And then at some point it's just you playing favorites. I don't know. I don't think this is your Discord though. Yeah, fuck it.
Yeah, I don't know.
Alan likes playing favorites.
Thanks, Mr. Twista. Oh yeah, I forgot the important thing. Everybody watching this should definitely wishlist Labrat on Steam. If you're watching this on Twitch or elsewhere, please. This is that's why I'm doing this right now. Can you wishlist Labrat on Steam? Please. Thank you. And Ripper Junkie, I don't think we're using forward shading. I definitely didn't enable that. I'm using, I don't know, materials in Unreal and lighting.
Yeah, deferred shading gets you a big win if you have a lot of light sources. So it's
God,
it depends on the game.
I don't think we're doing that. I'd have to work with Snite. I will have to look at that Audible Hourglass depending on which platform you're on. You're searching for the game on the Epic Games Store? Oh, Labrat is on Steam. I should probably post that. Talk amongst yourselves, gentlemen.
Are you expecting, I guess I was going to ask a gauche question. Never mind.
You're going to ask a gauche question?
Well, I was going to ask a platform question that you maybe don't want to answer.
Are you going to launch on Epic Games Store too? Ooh.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll find out. I don't have I have to pitch Epic. I have not done that yet. So, and right now it's a logistics problem. Like, a lot of the humor from the game comes from kind of these jokes about metrics, and I'm leaning really heavily into Steam's leaderboard system and Steam's like.
Oh right, yeah, you'd have to re-implement all of that stuff.
And I actually don't like when I first started this. I meant to implement it in such a way where I could easily go into the Epic Games Store, but there wasn't any like at the time. We started this in March of last year, and at the time there was no leaderboards. Like that was fresh, like that had only existed for like 3 weeks when I started this project, and there was no way to hook into that in Blueprint. And so I think there's a plugin now. I'm not sure. I might have to update the engine. Like it would be a non-trivial amount of work to go in and set this up to use Epic's backend. But I mean, it would be cool, like if I did do that work, because their backend is cross-platform. So it's worth considering. We will see.
Because if you port it to any console, you'd need a backend for that anyway, and you'd be able to use Epic's backend for it.
I believe so. Yeah, I have to look into it a little bit more. Like their whole thing is making a cross-platform backend. So people like they're really big on crossplay. But again, like I haven't leaned into it enough. I've definitely started conversations with them at like early on last year just to see if it was possible, and it is possible. I would have to work with them a bit, but I have a pretty tight relationship with Epic, so it's plausible. That being said, like I because it is work and because I'm like it's work that would take my time and I don't have that. So there would have to be some money involved. I think that's a really gauche thing to say, but it's the truth is like we would have to work Epic and I would have to work something out. Unfortunately, because like I just don't have time to just do that unless there's money in it. Like the amount of money I would have to make from that would have to be higher. Well, let me rephrase that. To do that at launch versus just waiting and doing it later. The game was built on development mode. Can I ask you why? There's a bug.
It's in development.
No, there's a bug when I launch on shipping mode. The executable crashes on launch, and I don't know why yet. Still working on that one. That's a bug in my backlog. I know about it. You know what, Ripper Junkie?
That's pretty low priority, right?
I'm gonna look into that, man. You know, you're giving me a lot of anxiety today, Ripper. I don't know what you're. I don't even know how you knew about that. Is that because you hit tilde and you said, don't actually? Let's not tell the people. Let's just be
Too
real.
late. Too late. It's out there.
Ah, fuck.
I just scrolled back to an earlier question. How necessary is it to make gameplay changes to appeal to players outside of puzzle game enthusiasts? And does working with a publisher give that more urgency? The second question, probably yes. But the first question, I know in my case, it's just not something I'm thinking about, but for better or worse. But I don't know. Is there something you're consciously doing with LabRad to try to be like, how do I make this? If I add this, it'll make it more appealing to people, who don't normally play this kind of game. Or
I wouldn't think of it like that. Like I want to make a game that's, I don't know. I want to make a game that's funny and that people like. I think there's I think a difference between perhaps you guys and me is that I actually really enjoyed Portal, and I actually kind of liked Gris.
Whoa!
And I love
Portal.
Well,
I love Portal.
Okay, so I think there's a lot of people that are really into puzzle games that want logical puzzle games and do not want any see everything else as superfluous or as detracting from the experience. And I am very much in the opposite direction. Like I loved the pedestrian. I love games that feel like they have a soul or a story or something to them. And to me, that makes a puzzle game much, much, much better. And also, I think that is also a more mass market opinion. So it just so happens that my tastes probably align a little bit more with the mass market. And so I don't look at it as like, I'm doing this for the mass market. I look at it as like, I think there should be some kind of delightful little treat every, 20 minutes. And that's not to align with the mass market. That's because I think that makes a better game, right? And so I just don't really think of it like that.
Yeah, a lot of the like every time Portal comes up in Ellen's Discord, there's like an amount of people that express that they don't like it, and usually that seems to be about difficulty. Like the saying that Portal is too easy and too smoothed out an experience, and I'm like, I just immediately resent focus on difficulty in general, but also just like, yeah, like a game that's that linear that you can only engage with one puzzle at a time. It's like it's very well served by this flow, and where you're not going to get stumped for too long on any one puzzle. And I don't know. I just think I'm all for easier puzzle games too.
Yeah, well, it's easier to if you want to have a narrative that is a very strong narrative like what they did there. That builds puzzle over puzzle. It requires the game to be linear. Being linear requires the game to not have any choke points that could potentially really frustrate the player and block them for a while. So, yeah, like the game kind of had to be easy in order to have the best possible narrative. I think that it's just harder to have a story that's cohesive that can be played at piecemeal in different directions. Yes, you can always add choke points and you can keep your narrative entirely to those choke points, but that means you've got large swaths of periods of time where things can be played out of order. Periods of everything that's not a choke point is a little bit swimmier. You know what I mean? As far as narrative flow goes. Like you can't read a book and say, well, I'll have the first page of every chapter will be, the same. So therefore it doesn't matter what the other pages are. Like, no, like if you're having a truly linear narrative where Gladys can turn into a potato and then is mad about being a potato, increasingly mad over 3 puzzles. And then, if you're going to have a narrative that linear, you have to have puzzles that are that linear, which means your game has to be kind of easier.
And even if you don't have a narrative, like I always think of Limelight as a game that I love that certainly has no narrative, but is like, it's again well served by a certain flow and it's linear. I guess
that game has optional puzzles and hidden puzzles, so it's not quite the same.
True. Ripper Junkie asks if we plan to translate the game. I do. Probably not at launch. I think I'm more interested in making the best possible game in English first, launching that, polishing it up a little bit after launch, and then translating it. Otherwise, iterating on the story would involve also getting things retranslated each time. You know what I mean? That's also why the demo isn't translated, because probably going to scrap a lot of these lines and retry them.
Well, and jokes are really hard to localize too.
Yeah. Fact.
Question from Steam chat. Very hard to answer. How many puzzle levels do you think is a solid demo to post on itch.io? And how many levels do you believe is worth in a $10 plus game? Depends on the game.
Yeah. $10 I would want about... yeah. I would think about it as hours.
Yeah, I would also agree with that. It's less about the number of levels and more about how long it takes to play them. For a demo, you probably want 10 minutes or so. For a $10 game, an hour or 2 minimum. I guess it depends. If your game is super charming in other areas, it can be shorter and get away with a lot more. But if the focus is on the puzzles, then you generally need either the puzzle mechanics to be super, super strong or to explore them really, really deeply. But I don't know. Try it and see.
Yeah. There's definitely a minimum. How do I put this? I think $20 is too much to pay for a 2-hour game.
That's so hard to.
But that is hard to
make hard rules about and stuff. And I love, there's some AAA games that are a 10 to 15 hour experience, and they cost the same as the 100-hour game. And I know some people put a lot of value onto the time, and I get that. But also it's what did you get out of it outside, beyond when you're done playing the game, and what it's given you, and in terms of games are not only giving you time of entertainment time, but they're also asking for your time. Yeah. So I really want that to be as dense as possible, and please shave 20 hours off the game and have no filler in it,
I would totally agree with that too. I was trying to come up with a hard fast rule. There really isn't one.
No, no, hard and fast rules are bad. Just don't bother having them.
All right, I was gonna message you guys because we are out of time. Do you want to end this, or do you want to keep going? What do you guys think?
I gotta go pick up my kid at preschool.
Well, that'll be that then.
So, unless you two can manage to keep this rally going.
You're the beating
my
heart of this,
lighting
Corey.
has been getting worse and worse over the last half hour. So
I just thought that was your mental state, just darkening.
yeah, I actually have this implant that connects the light level in the room to how depressed I am.
Mhm.
Really healthy.
Yeah, that makes. It's a British thing. I can see that coming from the UK these days. All right, cool. Well, I guess we will wrap it up here. Thank you, everybody, for watching on Twitch and on Steam.
Yeah, thanks for watching.
This has been really fun. Thanks, you two, for joining me.
Always a pleasure.
All
All
right.
right.
Thanks for organizing.
Of course. Bye bye. How do I put this?